In the last video, we got into the history of how the US came to be under a fiat monetary system. So now today, let's discuss what all this means for us moving forward here. So fiat monetary system is one where the currency is not backed by a hard commodity like gold or silver. It's just backed by promises from the government. The benefits of having a gold-backed system is that there are limitations put on how much the government can spend. They can only print so much based upon the amount of gold reserves that are kept on hand. Whereas under fiat system, money can just be printed into oblivion. So the entire world had been under a fiat system for about the last 50 years or so. And most countries agreed to it because it just happened to work, at least in the short term. But you're starting to see a lot of countries, especially the Eastern nations, you may have heard the BRICS group, they're moving more towards a resource-based system. It's not happening overnight. It's a slow transition, but they're going away from the Western debt system to a commodity-based system by hoarding the various commodities to have as backing for their currencies. So what prompted me to do these videos is that I hear a lot of people are discussing how the U.S. national debt just topped 35 trillion. But actually, that's not the number you should be looking at. What's much more telling is what's called unfunded liabilities. Because take, for example, you have a mortgage for $100,000, right? Well, because of interest, over the next 30 years, you're not paying back $100,000. You're paying back more like $300,000. So even though your debt is technically $100,000, you've entered into a contract and agreed to pay $300,000 over the course of that 30 years. So it works the same way with the government. In addition to the interest they have on that current 35 trillion in debt, they also have obligations into the future to pay on lots of social programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and tons of others. So their total unfunded liabilities is in the hundreds of trillions, okay? And now that doesn't even include other obligations the country has made for, say, sending foreign aid to other countries, or deals they've made to agree to send money to globalist organizations like the UN, NATO, World Health Organization, and places like that. So when you think of the hundreds of trillions or more that the U.S. is on the hook for paying going into the future, it really makes that 35 trillion look like a drop in the bucket in comparison. So the other thing I don't hear people mention is because the Eastern countries are moving away from the dollar, previously under the debt-based system, they needed to keep dollar reserves in their country on hand to facilitate foreign trade between nations and buying their oil and such. So there is countless trillions of dollars outside of the US kept in reserves. Well, as those countries move away from that system, they have less and less need for those US dollars. So slowly those dollars are trickling back in to the US, which is adding to the inflation problems. So we have kind of a double whammy where the government itself is just printing countless more trillions of dollars, while simultaneously there are trillions of dollars rolling in from outside of the country into it and increasing the rate that the money supply increases. So how does printing money create inflation? Well, whenever the government prints a brand new dollar, the value for that dollar needs to come from somewhere. So they do it by stealing a tiny bit of value from every single dollar that's already in existence. So whenever they create new dollars, it makes all the dollars out there worth just a little bit less, meaning they buy less. So actually, when you go to the store and you see higher prices, that's not the value of that good going up. That's the value of your currency going down and buying less with it. Now, that's very popular for governments to do because there's only two ways that a government can steal value from you. Because the government does not produce or generate anything. The only power they have is to steal value from someone with the threat of violence and then redistribute it somewhere else. So they can either tax you or inflate the money. Now, of course, raising taxes is very unpopular and causes problems, uprisings amongst the people. So it's politicians much prefer the inflation method because while taxation is overt theft and you can see it's being done to you, inflation is covert theft because the average person does not understand that it's being done to them. So that's the method of thievery of choice for politicians. So is this going to slow down this inflation? I'm afraid not. I see a lot of people are hopeful that things will change come this new election in November, but it will not. We are at the point where even if the government completely stopped spending any money, did not add a single penny of debt from here, we already have enough in the unfunded liabilities already that just paying off that debt is costing more than they're bringing in tax money. So we're past the breaking point where even if they stop spending, the debt will still keep rising. So it's important for you to understand this. A lot of preppers talk about ways that things can fall apart. You know, they'll mention World War III or a hack on the power grid or a disease or whatever. Yes, all of these things have some possibility that they could happen. But this higher increasing inflation is a mathematical certainty. It will happen. Whether you like it or not, it is going to happen. It may take 10 or 15 years before we see the absolute worst of it, but it is a mathematical certainty. It will happen. So I feel it's worth everybody at least pondering that and thinking on it and start preparing yourself in some way. Because if it's going to come, whether we think it will or not, it's going to happen. Do you want to have the rug pulled up from under you and be surprised by it, or be ready in some way for it? Don't get excited that these short-term things in the news are going to have any effect. Okay, what happens today or this week in the news? Just think a year from now. Are you going to remember 99% of the things that happened in the news this week? No, you're going to completely forget it. Because the fact is, the majority of that's in the news in the short term is just noise. It's just noise, okay? So, got to break out of this short term thinking. Because even the ants crawling around at my feet don't think in the short term like that. They're thinking longer term. And you need to as well realize these long-term trends that are happening in the world, because if you don't recognize them, they're going to come and they're going to smack you upside the head without you even realizing it. So I'm not bringing this up to scare people or fearmonger, because scared people do not make smart decisions. So it's not something worth panicking over. It's just something to be mindful of and start taking action for now. it's going to happen. So I just felt like maybe I can do a small part in helping wake people up to the fact that higher prices are not only going to continue, but they're going to increase at faster and faster rates as time goes on.